asking about food and health and nutrition and how to optimize your health and wellness. And today we're going to get to as many of those as we can. And this is also Whole Life Club's monthly action hour. And because it's a twofer and because we're combining both of these communities in one event, we're going to go for an hour and a half today. And we're going to get to as many questions as we can. So if you are somebody who wants to optimize your healthy eating lifestyle, who wants to leverage food as the foundation of health, who wants to make food into medicine and to create the conditions for your body to thrive, you're in the right place. And you're with the right people. I am so happy to be here with Dr. Clapper and dietitian Brenda Davis. Now, before I introduce them, let me make one thing very clear. This is coaching and education. This is not medical advice. We are not here to treat symptoms. We're not here to treat conditions. We're not here to prescribe anything at all. So please use your own best judgment. Consult with qualified medical professionals about all medical issues. And I want to make that absolutely clear. And some of the questions that we'll be addressing maybe relate to symptoms and medications. And if we respond to that, we'll just be sharing like friends, giving feedback on what we've experienced and seen. But again, you're responsible for your own health journey in consult with the qualified professionals you enlist on your team. So with all that said, let me just take a moment now to say how happy I am to be here. First of all, Dr. Michael Clapper has been a family friend, a treasured family friend, going back, 30 plus years now. And we've been working together in the trenches for a food revolution for decades, since I had a higher pitched voice than I do today.
I remember well.
Yeah, I was a teenager when we met, a gangly teenager. And Dr. Clapper was my science teacher in homeschooling. And anyway, here we are today working for a food revolution. He's one of the most legendary plant-based docs on the planet. His TED Talk has been seen recently, just from this last year, by hundreds of thousands of people. He's written books that are legends on vegan nutrition and plant-based eating for kids and so many other topics. Dr. Clapper is now standing to try to transform medicine and move medicine forward so that every doctor can make food the foundation of their practice. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Ocean. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
And we played your interview on the first day. You were on day one of the Food Revolution Summit, and the response was just so enthusiastic. People just loved it. Everybody watching right now, if you haven't seen it, when we're done with this event, make sure you do check out Dr. Clapper's incredible interview. Now, Brenda Davis, who's been in multiple Food Revolution Summits over the years, is an extraordinary dietitian. She co-wrote the American Nutrition and Dietetic Association's position paper on plant-based diets. She is the best-selling author of over 10 books, I believe, author or co-author on plant-based nutrition that have sold over 700,000 copies. And she is an absolute legend when it comes to the application of healthy eating in your life. Brenda, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's my my immense pleasure and privilege. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we're so happy you're here. And now I want to jump right in. We have received over 400 questions in advance of this event from Whole Life Club members and also from Food Revolution Summit Empowerment Package owners. And what I've done is our team's clustered those, and we're going to try to get to as many as we can. And obviously, we're not going to be able to get to 400 because we'd be here for all week. But we're going to do the best we can to get to as many as we can. And so let's just go ahead and jump right in. Brenda, this first one I'll send to you. It's from Jerry W., who said, I've been told people over 60 shouldn't eat raw food. I'm 72. I eat 80% of my vegetables raw. Could that be the cause of my microscopic collagenous colitis?
Oh, wow. I don't think eating raw foods would have been the cause of the disease. I think in this case, a lot of the main causes are medications, viruses, bacteria, autoimmune diseases. And there is absolutely zero evidence that people over 60 shouldn't eat raw foods. And I think actually to the contrary, they're highly protective for older people because they're so high in phytochemicals and antioxidants and, anti-inflammatory compounds and just a whole host of protective nutrients and phytonutrients. On the other hand, for people with microscopic collagenous colitis, raw foods, depending on the raw foods we're talking about, could be somewhat irritating, and depending on the choices you're making. So I would, if you're doing a lot of raw foods, I would be using a lot of blended and pureed, for example, some smoothies, some blended soups. You want to be sure to chew those foods as well as you possibly can. You want to be getting a lot of fluids. You want to be also including enough well-cooked foods as well, especially foods that are easy to digest. For some people, they might need to avoid potentially allergenic foods, like the two that come to mind quickly are gluten and dairy products. And then the other thing I would think of is just to be doing some probiotics. And for some people, they may also want to include or try for at least a short period of time a low FODMAP diet, which may be somewhat helpful, and using a lot of anti-inflammatory herbs and spices as well.
Thank you, Brenda. Dr. Clapper, I'll call you Michael since you're a
Sure,
family friend.
Sure.
Next one is from Linda, who asked about, she said she's struggling with her stool a year after changing her diet. Can you give us some guidelines on what's considered normal in frequency and consistency when eating a primarily plant-based diet? And I suppose if somebody is struggling presumably with some constipation kinds of issues and they're already eating a predominantly whole foods plant-based diet, what are some extra tips that might help them get over the hump to the regularity and ease they want?
Okay, important point. Again, we have the same kind of digestive system, basically, that our gorilla and bonobo cousins have, and they're living up in the trees, eating leaves and fruits. Then they pass these big, soft bowel movements once or twice a day. And we basically should be doing a similar type of pattern. So to make a healthy, soft, warm stool, you need a combination of soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. Soluble fiber absorbs water, like rice and oatmeal. If you have water, they puff right up. You need about half your mass in soluble fiber. And insoluble fiber is the hard, shiny fiber in leaves like lettuce and celery. You put a celery stalk in water, doesn't absorb any water. Well, you need both of those in roughly equal amounts to create a soft, bulky stool that's easy for the colon to get a purchase on and push it along. And this is not necessarily in one meal, but over the course of the day, you're going to want to certainly have one big salad every day. And you certainly, it helps to start your morning off with some porridge or fruit. And right away, you're off to the races with that 50-50 mix of soluble and insoluble fiber. The other things you need to do are chew them up really, really well so that they don't cause any irritation. And as Brenda said, necessarily use a blender or make blended soups, etc. And you need enough water in order to keep your stool soft. Every day, our colon reabsorbs 6 quarts of water from the fecal mass back into our bloodstream. If you're not drinking enough water, your colon is going to take extra water out of that fecal mass and leave you with a hard stool. So sometimes these hard to pass stools are a sign of dehydration, of not drinking enough water. So be sure you drink enough water. And the last thing is fruit is a natural laxative. And if you're eating, you want a good dollop of those whole grains, the soluble fiber and the insoluble fiber in the salad. But if you're still not moving along there, then a nice trick that we used at True North Health Clinic is every morning, take a dish of fresh water, plop 4 or 5 fresh prunes in there, let them soak all day so they're nice and plump and hydrated by the evening, and have those 5 or 6 prunes for dessert. And they have a natural laxative action. And when added to that nice stool mass, the next morning you usually have a soft, easy to pass bowel movement. So soluble and insoluble fiber, plenty of water, and some fruit if you need it. And get out and take a walk every day. Jiggle that colon up and down. I think sitting in front of the computer is not healthy for good bowel function. So make sure you get out and honor your animal nature. And if you do those things, your colon and its product should be much happier for you.
Thanks, Michael. Relatedly, I'll answer this one from Lucy, who said, how exciting, 3 of my favorite speakers. Any tips on enhancing the healing of my gut and microbiome after radiation and chemo treatments? I've been 100% plant-based for 2.5 years. I was diagnosed with anal cancer in November 2018 and had 6 weeks of radiation and chemo that finished February 6th. I stuck with my plant-based lifestyle and have added a once-a-day probiotic and an enzyme with my 3 core meals of the day. I also avoid refined sugars, oils, and use very little salt, drink lots of water, and exercise 30 to 40 minutes a day. However, I'm still struggling to get my system on track with gurgling, gas, stomach aches, bloating, and less than satisfactory poops. P.S. Thanks, Ocean, for your wonderful book, 31 Day Food Revolution. It came at a perfect time, and I loved every word of it. Well, thank you, Lucy. That's wonderful to hear, and we're so glad you're here with us. So you actually are doing a lot of the right things, and I just want to remind you, your body has been through a real trauma, and so it's understandable that it will take some time to reset and readjust, and I want to encourage you to have patience and persistence in that journey. Don't expect it to just flip around overnight. And that said, the one thing I didn't hear you mention that I want to encourage is prebiotics. And also, let's make sure you're taking the probiotics at the right time of day. So a lot of people take probiotics first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. Guess what happens? They go right into your stomach and your stomach acids just murder them, basically, and they don't get through, right? So what studies have found is that when you take probiotics about 20 to 30 minutes after a medium-sized meal that includes some fat, that's the optimal for actually having them get through your digestive tract to make a difference on the other end. You want to get them down there as deep as you can into your body. And that seems to be the trick. And the other piece is eating the prebiotics, the foods that feed the good guys in your gut. And some of the top prebiotics are going to be jicama, hickory root, acacia gum, Jerusalem artichokes, garlic, onions, leeks, dandelion greens, leafy greens, asparagus, legumes, and bananas. There are others, but those are some of the most potent ones that you'll find. And, some of those are more common. Obviously, a lot of people eat bananas and legumes and leafy greens. Less people are eating the hickory root or acacia gum or jicama or Jerusalem artichokes, but adding those in can be really beneficial to help you feed the good guys so that they have the nutrients they need. Those are the particular optimal kinds of fiber that are really good for the healthy bacteria you want in your gut. Let's see, a couple questions relating to osteoporosis and bone health. Michael, I'll ask you to answer this one. This is also from Lois, who said, I have postmenopausal osteoporosis. I listened to Dr. Clapper's osteoporosis webinar. When I eat whole food vegan, greens, beans, low starch veggie, high starch veggie, and nuts at each meal, I develop pain in all my joints. Why does that happen? And how can I eat as a whole food vegan without the osteoporosis joint pain? Am I missing something? Too much of something? What do you think?
Okay, I think we need to clarify some of the terms here. Osteoporosis is the loss of bone marrow. The bones are dissolving because basically we're not using them. We're sitting all day and they're melting away on us. That's a painless process. That does not hurt. So it's not the osteoporosis that's causing the pain. But if your joints are sore, it's usually the soft tissues around the joints. People say, oh, it's arthritis, but it's often the ligaments and the tendons and the muscles around the joints that are inflamed. And again, what people are eating as well as how they're using it are usually the two reasons that those joints get upset. So in view of what she said, when she eats that whole panoply of foods there, she winds up sore the next day. You have to assume there's at least one of those foods she's eating that's causing a low-grade adverse reaction. And this is where the idea of the elimination diet comes in very well. She should take that group of foods, pull all of them out except the one she feels that's the most comfortable and safe for her. If she knows she's never had a problem with rice before or quinoa or kale, then great. Have a meal with just rice or quinoa. Let the night go by. Verify you're okay in the morning. Nothing bad happened. And then add a second food of those groups in. And add that to your meal for dinner and see what the next day brings, the next 2 days bring. And add these foods back in one at a time till one morning, if your joints are all sore, aha, that was the one that was doing it. And you clearly have a sensitivity to that food. So it's okay. Don't eat it for 6 months. And let your microbiome change, let everything change, and see if you're able to tolerate it. But there's usually one food that's causing the sore joints. So rather than throw them all out and throw your hands up, oh, this food is not working for me, use a little power deduction to identify the one food that's causing the problem, and then construct your diet around by walking around that particular one for a while.
Thank you very much, Michael. And we do have a question from somebody who, Linda, who was diagnosed with osteoporosis, asking about that specifically and saying, they gave me a med which made me ill and I had to stop taking it. So much of our chronic disease seems to stem from our poor American diets. I'm wondering if osteoporosis is one of them. How can I salvage my bone density with whole foods?
Oh, it certainly does. To make a long story short, I invite people to go to my website, drklapper.com, all spelled out, DOCTORKLAPER.com, and see my video called Healthy Bones. And I go into this whole issue there. But basically, as I mentioned, osteoporosis is not a disease of calcium deficiency. It's not a disease of not drinking enough cow's milk. It's basically disuse atrophy of the bones. Our bones are dissolving. We're doing things to help that, too much salt, too much sugar, too much protein. But largely we stopped using them. 100 years ago, when we spent all day working in the garden and carrying firewood and lifting bales of hay, people didn't get osteoporosis nearly like they do now. It's the sitting that's causing the problem. Well, the good news is that the bones in your cells that spin out, the cells in your bones that spin out new bone tissue, the osteoblasts, they're still in there. They're just waiting for you to use them. They're very active of carrying a weight in your arms, of doing some of these lovely yoga moves. If you Google yoga for osteoporosis, there are yoga poses that cause just a little bit of bending, micro torsion of the bone. And that's enough to wake up the osteoblasts and make them say, oh boy, she's using our bones. We better spin out more bone tissue here. But just like your muscles, the more you use your muscles, the stronger they get. The more you use your bones, the stronger they get. So the idea is start using those bones. The easiest way, as I mentioned, anything that distorts the bones a little bit will work. These resistance bands will work. Yoga poses will work. But if you're an outdoor person, you like to walk, off Amazon, you can get a little 8-pound weighted vest. Put that vest on under a t-shirt or a sweatshirt, grab a couple of 3-pound hand weights and go for a nice 30-minute walk with a lightweight vest and a couple of hand weights. I guarantee you do that every other morning for a few months and watch that bone density go up for the right reason, because your bones are getting stronger, not because they're getting manipulated by some of these drugs here. So reclaim your physical activity and let your bones know that you love them, and they'll respond by getting stronger. It is a reversible disease.
Great, thank you. Next one I'm going to ask Brenda to address from Grace, who said liquid aminos. I love them, but 2 MDs told me not to use them because it's too processed. If I remember correctly, Dr. Furman uses them in some of his recipes, as well as Dr. Oz. What do you think about Bragg liquid aminos?
Well, thanks, Grace. Liquid aminos are not nearly as highly processed as probably 7 or 80% of the foods that North Americans are eating. They're fairly minimally processed, and there are actually two types of liquid aminos. There are soy liquid aminos, which is the Braggs that we're talking about, but there's also coconut liquid aminos, and both are preferable to soy sauce, especially some of the very poorly produced, cheap manufactured soy sauces. They have far fewer ingredients. They're both gluten-free. And of the two, I would say probably coconut aminos has one advantage over soy liquid aminos, and that's a little less sodium. So to me, they're reasonably acceptable flavorings for foods, your choice. I know the biggest concern is for a lot of people is that they contain glutamates. And I think that a lot of foods contain glutamates. It's an amino acid, and they will be naturally present in a number of foods. So I think, conservative use or judicious use is reasonable, but you don't want to overdo them. They're both really salty foods.
Yeah, thank you. We heard from Teresa. I'll address this one. She said, what's your opinion of homemade milk kefir? I much prefer the taste to water kefir, which is too sweet for me. Well, Teresa, I think we heard in the summit from Doctors Erica and Justin Sonnenberg, who are extraordinary experts on gut health, about the value of eating fermented foods. And they personally talked about how they drink kefir, milk kefir in their diets. And then we had some questions, and my dad actually asked them, well, do you think that's better than kefirs made from soy or almond or other bases? And they said, no, that's just what they've done because that's what they kind of were used to. The reality is there's a lot of data showing that there's a value to eating fermented foods. You can ferment lots of different things. Yes, there's water kefirs. They are kind of sweet typically because they're fermented on sugar. But you can ferment. I make my own homemade soy yogurt, and I love it. We have a little yogurt maker, Yo Gourmet, it's called. And the best, I make sometimes my own homemade soy milk too, or almond milk, and then put it in there and ferment it with culture, and that's awesome, but not super thick. If I get the Eden Soy unsweetened soy milk, which is a little more processed than homemade soy milk, but it makes a really thick, wonderful kind of soy yogurt. But you can also make kefirs in these yogurt makers as well, and you can base them around any kind of nut, all kind oats even, and some are thinner and some are thicker than others. They all have their own nutritional profiles and flavors, but it's nice to experiment and see what kind suits your fancy. You don't have to add sugar at all. You can add some fruit if you want to sweeten it up. Sometimes I'll mix in some bananas, blueberries, strawberries, and I just have this incredibly fabulous breakfast. Or you can blend it up, of course, use it as a base in a smoothie. Brenda, next one for you is from Leanne, who said, is it safe to cook all kinds of beans fresh from the garden, like how we eat peas? I'm thinking of black turtle, kidney, chickpea, etc. Brenda, it looks like Leanne is thinking about planting these in her garden and wondering if she could eat them raw and fresh, or if they need to be dried and cooked for safety.
Leanne, that's the first time anyone has ever asked me that question. So I think that's a really interesting question. And I can tell you, I'm pretty certain that peas are the only beans that are safe to eat fresh out of your garden without cooking them. And the reason is beans contain a number of lectins or hemagglutinins that can actually be quite toxic if they're not cooked. And so there are some small legumes, for example, lentils, mung beans, that can actually just be sprouted and then eaten without being cooked. But the larger legumes, especially red kidney beans, are probably the worst. But all of the large legumes contain a certain amount of these potentially toxic compounds. But even just 20-30 minutes of cooking will completely destroy them, soften the beans, and make them digestible and edible. Now, it's interesting, I think, comparing, I think the good news for you, if you're going to be gardening, is when you compare fresh beans with dried beans, the fresh beans have less of the the compounds that cause gas, the oligosaccharides. The longer you store beans, the more oligosaccharides they get. And so the fresh beans tend to cause less gas, and they cook way more quickly, probably 20 or 30 minutes compared to an hour to 2 hours with the dried beans. So there are a lot of advantages to getting fresh beans.
Got it. Thank you. We had a lot of questions about protein. And rather than going over them one by one, I'm just going to kind of combine them and have us have a brief chat about protein here. Michael, I'll ask you to address this one first. A lot of people wondering how much protein they really should be getting. And, there are different ways to look at that. And obviously, it depends life stage. It varies. You need a little more as you get older. People who are more athletic may need a little more, especially if they're doing like weight training or, power lifting or stuff like that. What are some general guidelines and some variables, and how can people kind of assess that, Michael?
Indeed. You mentioned to anyone that you're a vegan, vegetarian, or a plant-based eater, the first question out of their mouth is, where do you go to get your protein? And the truth is that all vegetable matters have protein. Mother Nature can't make a lentil or a bean or a blade of lettuce without leaf of lettuce without putting protein in there. And protein are long chains of these building blocks called amino acids, and we consume the protein-containing food. We disassemble the protein into the individual amino acids, send them up to our liver, where liver and other tissues reassemble them as our proteins. It's a wonderful mechanism. So how many of these building blocks do you really need? We used to think, and since we're Americans, if a little is good, more must be better, that more protein is better. And these huge high protein diets have come into vogue, and the bodybuilders eat 100, 150 grams of protein a day. And we didn't think there's a problem. We now know there's a problem. There's a couple of problems with high protein diets. We'll get to the numbers in a minute here. But too much protein is not healthy. Too much protein is toxic. When people eat meat, or even these vegetable protein powders, all those amino acids slam into the kidney filters, into the kidney glomeruli. High protein diets are hard on the kidneys. And these folks eating high protein diets month after month, I think, are writing themselves a ticket to the dialysis machine. This is not a healthy thing to be doing. It's one reason we're seeing lots of low-grade kidney failure. Second, when you shovel all those amino acids into the liver says, ooh, building blocks, let's build something with them. And the liver puts out this hormone called insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1. This is the most potent growth-promoting hormone in the body. And if you're a woman with little breast cancer or a little guy with prostate cancer, and you're shoveling in all this protein and having your liver put out all this IGF-1, this is like throwing gasoline on a fire. It fosters cancer growth. It hurts the arteries. More protein is not better. So we should all back off. This high protein is what we want to do. No, it's not. So how much protein do you really need? When it comes down to grams, we got to throw these numbers out. A penny weighs 3 grams. We're talking for a good average healthy person, what the body really needs is only 20 or 30 grams a day. The recommendations are 50 grams, 60 grams, more than enough for all normal, healthy human beings. If you're a competitive bodybuilder or a pregnant woman, you can add an extra 10 grams or 15 grams to that. But again, it's not a matter of a big protein-rich smoothie. It's having another scoop or two of lentil stew. It's having another bean burrito. It's having another hummus sandwich. That's how you get extra protein. It should be in whole plant foods. So keep it in the 50, 60 gram range, and a little bit more if you're a bodybuilder or pregnant woman. But we can all back off from these high protein diets. They're really not healthy. Keep it well below 70 grams, I would say, a day.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Brenda, would you add anything to that? And as well, for those who are wanting to increase for whatever reason a bit, some people are interested in protein supplements, protein powders, protein sources that are maybe extra concentrated. Do you have any recommendations for those who do have that interest on what might be the best ones, be it pea or hemp, or do you just think they're not a good idea?
Yeah, well, first of all, in terms of needs, I think that it is possible for people not to get enough protein. And where we see that often is in young people who switch suddenly to a completely plant-based diet. Instead of eating, burger and fries and soda, they just eat the fries and soda. Those kinds of diets can, sort of junk food diets can be lacking in protein. And the other types of diets that can be lacking are diets that are mainly fruit. And then the third potential concern, I would say, would be people who are senior and not eating very many calories. And so as we get older, our ability to digest and break down amino acids and absorb them is somewhat diminished. And because your energy needs are also diminished, it means you actually need to be eating a little higher protein diet to get the protein you to be able to digest the protein you need to digest. And so there are some instances where it can be a little bit more of a challenge, but generally, if you're eating enough calories and you're eating a variety of plant foods, and especially including legumes, what we call the amino acid that might be lacking if someone just barely gets, say a child needs 20 grams of protein and all they get is 20 grams of protein. The amino acid that could be limited is lysine. And so we want to be sure that we include some legumes in the diet. So lentils and beans and so forth, which can be very helpful. Now, for people that are wanting to increase their protein intake for whatever reason, they're athletes or they're seniors that are losing muscle mass, whatever, they want to increase simply protein. A lot of people are asking about the protein powders. And so my own personal preference is to get my protein from whole foods. So if I'm making a smoothie, for example, I would use frozen peas, hemp seeds, soft tofu to boost the protein level in the smoothie, as opposed to using pea protein, hemp seed protein. Because whenever you extract protein from a food, you have to do it with some chemicals often, and you're concentrating, you're concentrating just the protein. I want all of the wonderful attributes of that food, the fiber and the phytochemicals and so on. So I prefer to get it from the whole food. Now, if you really want to use a protein powder, which one's best? Well, pea offers some advantages in that it's higher in protein per scoop than hemp protein, and it has a little better, I should say it has a significantly better digestibility score. It's also more economical. And hemp is slightly less processed, on the other hand. It's higher in fiber, and it's also much higher in essential fatty acids. So there are advantages to both of those.
Yeah, and just a word of caution, whey protein can be allergenic. Soy protein is often genetically engineered, and there are some studies indicating that isolated soy protein can have negative impacts in the body. And let's see, what's the other big one? We see, oh yeah, rice. There's a lot of rice protein out there. That's high in arsenic. That's one of the problems with rice in general, is that it's contaminated with arsenic. It grows in big swamps, and for whatever reason, it absorbs whatever arsenic is in there. And we live in an increasingly polluted world, and rice seems to be kind of the canary in the coal mine for all the grains. So Consumer Reports found that virtually all the rice is contaminated with some amount of arsenic. We had a question about this, but I'll just address it now since we're on the topic. Rice is something that we eat sometimes in our family, but we limit it to like once a week or so we can keep our exposure down, and we focus more on quinoa, buckwheat, amaranth, millet, some of the other whole grains that don't have that problem. And quinoa is our kind of go-to grain most of all, because I love the nutritional profile, and frankly, I love the taste. So we're not like zero rice, but I do think that it's something that you want to be conscious of, because unfortunately, even organic rice has some arsenic contamination in it. And certainly protein powder is going to give you a concentrated boost of that.
Ocean, could I add one thing to that?
Yeah, please.
With rice, a lot of people think if they buy organic rice or brown rice or, the whole grain rices, they will be preferable, and they're not. Even brown rice syrup is quite high in arsenic. Yeah. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that there is a way to significantly reduce arsenic in rice if you are we do exactly what you do, Ocean. We eat it maybe once, well, actually, to be honest, probably once a month. But when you cook it, if you cook it, say 1 part rice to 5 or 6 parts water, there are studies showing that you will significantly reduce the arsenic content, and then you just drain it, rather than doing the kind of 2-to-1 boiling that we would normally do. So that's something just to be aware of as well.
Yeah, and another option, which is actually what we do, is we partially sprout it. We soak it, for about 48 hours, pouring off the water every 12, and then we cook it. It doesn't need to cook for as long at that point, but it's the same trick. Essentially, a lot of the water is taking the arsenic out of it.
Exactly.
One last historical point. Where is that arsenic coming from? It's coming from 2 sources. A lot of the rice now is grown in the southern part of the U.S., where they used to grow cotton on these fields, and they use arsenic-containing pesticides to kill the boll weevils, and the arsenic is still in the soil from the cotton crops. But also, arsenic is fed to commercial chickens to make their flesh look pinker in the meat case. That arsenic gets out into the chicken's feathers. The feathers are taken off when the chicken is killed, ground up into a fertilizer, which is then applied to the fields. So the arsenic is also coming in chicken feathers from arsenic-raised chicken. So for bright species, we're not real smart when it comes to producing our food, and the price is arsenic in our rice because of it.
Thank you for that context, Michael. several people asked about soy and corn, saying that there's been a lot said positive about it, but what about GMOs? Well, actually, Mary had that question directly today. And Mary, I'll say, yes, that's a concern. And when we talk about soy and corn, I always try to put an asterisk on there that says organic or non-GMO, because most of the corn and most of the soy that's growing today is growing in the genetically engineered system, and it's sprayed with glyphosate, which is an endocrine disruptor and a probable carcinogen and an antibiotic. It can actually disrupt gut bacteria. There are a lot of different problems and concerns with GMOs. We won't go into all of them now, but let me just underline, when you're eating corn or soy based products, because they're often used as the kind of core ingredient for a lot of different processed foods, unless it is certified organic or non-GMO, it's almost certainly going to be genetically engineered with all of the resultant issues. Fortunately, in the natural foods community, there's a lot of organic soy and a lot of non-GMO soy. So it isn't hard to find organic tofu, organic soy milk, organic corn tortillas, all sorts of things like that, which are going to protect you. Let me also add, while we're on the topic, that most of the corn and soy that are produced in the world are fed to livestock and not to humans. And ironically, some people are worried about destruction of the rainforest for soy plantation. And so they started eating burgers instead of tofu. And it turns out that those burgers are often coming from cattle that were fed soy, and or cattle that were grazing even on rainforest land. So the bottom line is that eating more soy and less meat is actually a wonderful way to help save the rainforests and actually have less genetically engineered soy be grown in the world, because so much of it's being cycled through livestock. But again, when you're eating corn and soy, look for certified organic or certified non-GMO. Antoinette, I'll address this one too, said, thanks so much for providing these events. I'm deficient in vitamin D, and I'm taking a supplement D3 for over a year. My levels have improved a bit, but not much. My doctor increased my dosage. I also heard it's best to take with K2. Is this correct? I'm also trying to get more sun each day. Any tips would be great. Well, Antoinette, I think vitamin D is a wonderful thing. I will say anecdotally that I started taking vitamin D3 daily about 8 years ago. And I've had one cold in the last 8 years. I used to get a cold like every year. My dad started taking it daily about 10 years ago. He's had no colds in the last 10 years. He used to get 1 or 2 a year. That's anecdotal, but I will say that there are a lot of studies showing that vitamin D is helpful with the immune system, among other bodily functions. And traditionally, humans would get it because we were out in the sun a lot. But in the modern world, cooped up indoors all day and with clothes on, we don't necessarily, and some of us living in northern climates, we don't necessarily get the optimal amount that our bodies produce naturally. So supplementation can be helpful. And vitamin D3 in particular, studies show is stronger than D2, and there are vegan sources of vitamin D3 available. And you can get your levels checked. The Vitamin D Council is a wonderful resource doing a lot of pioneering research on this. And they also have a test kits you can order through them to find out what your levels are, or you can just get it, through a basic blood draw with your doctor. And it's good. They're saying that many of us are taking, even people who are supplementing are not supplementing with high enough quantities. So I think research is still developing on this. And I'm not going to tell you what you should take, but I'll tell you personally, I take about 7,000 IUs per day of vitamin D3. And unless I'm in the sun a lot, and then I scale it back. And that feels great to me, and it's based on my own take. That's more than is officially recommended, but I think official recommendations may go up as new research is causing them to be updated. And as far as sources, I'll tell you, because we've had a number of people asking about specific brands and supplements. My favorite is Complement, which is an all-vegan source of just the nutrients that whole foods, plant-based eaters tend to struggle with. So they have EPA and DHA plus vitamin D3 plus K2, which is helpful in absorption of vitamin D3, plus some zinc and vitamin B12. And you get all of that in one supplement, so you just take it daily. And if you go to foodrevolution.org/complement, because it's meant to complement your regular whole foods plant-based diet, you can get all of those in one source. And I think it's a high integrity company that I feel good about working with and supporting. Again, that's foodrevolution.org/complement. Dr. Clapper, Michael, Brenda, would either of you want to add anything to that, or does that pretty much sync up with your thinking as well?
Yes. Right. Your comment about the blood test is appropriate, and they can be used to help you find the right dosage. Basically, you want to keep your blood level of vitamin D between 30 and 70 nanograms per ml. And people try way overshoot it. Oh, I want 100. No, you don't. There's toxicity. And even mortality goes up with these very high levels of vitamin D. So take however many units you need to keep your blood level between 30 and 70, and you should be fine, depending whatever that number eventually turns out to be.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's see, this one's from Michael from Lois, who said, why is it that when I eat a whole food vegan diet with lots of greens, beans, low starch, high starch, and nuts in each meal, my nails get smaller and weaker, and the cuticles on the sides of my nails pull apart from dry skin? Do you get my point, she asks. So nails getting smaller and weaker, and cuticles on the sides pulling apart from the skin. Any thoughts on how food might play into that?
Right. There's a couple of minerals that are needed for healthy nails. Zinc certainly is prominent among them, and zinc can be one of the tougher nutrients to get on a plant-based diet. It's in whole grains, it's in root vegetables, but if there's any question about your intake of those two, then you may want to take a low-potency multivitamin that has 15 to 30 milligrams of zinc in it, along with 2 milligrams of copper. The other one is you want enough omega-3 fatty acids to work their way into the skin oils and into the oils of the nail plate. And so whatever you need to keep your DHA level up, whether that's a couple of handfuls of walnuts, more flax seeds on your cereal, or just take a 150 to 300 milligrams of an algae-derived, underlying algae-derived, not from fish, algae-derived DHA, and that will slowly work its way into your skin to hopefully strengthen things in your nails. But I just want to say, far and away, the most common cause of cracked nails and flaking nails are not nutritional at all. We live in a very hygienic-minded society, and we wind up washing our hands frequently during the day. Well, those detergents take the oils out of the nail plate of your skin, and you extract enough oil, and the nail's going to start splitting and cracking at the ends. And often it's just from the amount of hand washing or the particular type of detergent that you're using to wash your hands. And I'm not saying you cut back in your hand washing, but you may want to go to either just a standard non-detergent soap, or through the beauty shop or the beauty supply places, you can get these lovely small little bottles of nail oil that you can rub on your skin after you wash your hands once a day, and see if you can get some of those oils back into the nail plate. So often what gets blamed on the person's plant-based diet is really excessive hand washing from really aggressive detergents. And if you change that, often the nail's healthy right up there. But don't forget the zinc and essential fats.
Wow, thank you for that. Very helpful. Brenda, next one for you. Susan asked about brain health and the prevention of Alzheimer's, and said that a lot of people have adopted a grain-free diet to support Alzheimer's prevention. What is your opinion on that? And I will add, because I know other people have been asking about it, what are some of the top foods you do recommend for Alzheimer's prevention and brain health?
Well, I really don't agree that we need to remove grains, although I do agree we need to use grains we need to avoid grains that have been sprayed with glyphosate. So I think it's really important when you're consuming grains that they're organic. And so whatever grains, some people, if you're gluten sensitive, certainly you don't want to be consuming gluten containing grains. But to eliminate quinoa and millet and all of these other grains, to me, there's absolutely no evidence that they're problematic. There is evidence that excessive saturated fat and meat is problematic. There's a lot of evidence that we need sufficient fat. And so, but we want it to be healthy fat. We want to be making sure we get enough essential fatty acids. And for some people, they'll make enough DHA and EPA from eating, enough flax seeds and chia seeds and walnuts and so forth. Others won't. And so for those people, that microalgae based EPA and DHA can be extremely important. And so the other things we want a lot of are these protective phytochemicals, antioxidants, anti-inflammatory compounds. So we're talking about eating a lot of dark green leafy vegetables and berries and all of the colors of the rainbow when we're talking about fruits and vegetables. But also, when you're choosing beans, choose colorful beans. But we want the whole gamut of plant foods, lots of fiber, not too much harmful fat, and you want to avoid processed foods, you want to avoid sugar, and you want to avoid any deep fried foods or fried foods. So that would be my suggestions. And lots of herbs and spices. We underestimate the value of those foods.
And I can want to add something very important. I was in Warsaw, Poland a couple of weeks ago at the International Conference on Lifestyle Medicine, and encountered an Italian neuroscientist, Luigi Pirelli over there, lovely man, who studies Alzheimer's. And we were talking about ways to prevent it. He says, by far, the most important thing you can do is drink enough water, keep yourself well hydrated. He says you can see under the microscope when people aren't drinking enough water, their brain cells wrinkle up, they shrivel up, and the proteins get really concentrated, and they start coalescing and coagulating, and that's the first step towards amyloid plaque formation. But he says when people drink, he said within a few hours, whoop, you see those cells rehydrate again, and the concentration of protein goes down. Much, much healthier for the cells. So the chronic dehydration people experience may be one of the initiating factors in the Alzheimer's process. And so drink enough water. I asked him, what do you really drink? He said, in the morning, by noontime, I've gone through a 1 liter bottle. It's a quart for us Americans. And by the rest of the day, I go through 2 more liters. So I do my honest 3 liters a day. And that's a pretty good mark to shoot for. So I would suggest people take that advice.
Thank you. And I'll add one more piece. Researchers at Rush University in Chicago found that people who consumed the most greens had 11 more years of healthy brain function on average.
Awesome.
11 years. I mean, that's a big deal when you think about all the people we know who might be suffering from or fearing Alzheimer's, and what they would give, what we would give to have 11 more years of life back. And just eating greens regularly, like lots of them, 11 more years. And then in another study, blueberries added 2.5 years of healthy brain function when people ate blueberries regularly. So greens and blueberries, and probably if you eat greens and blueberries, you might be looking at 13.5 years, right?
Absolutely.
So when you combine that with eating less saturated fat, and you would combine that with eating some of the potent anti-inflammatories and maybe getting some turmeric, who knows what's possible for brain health. But, I personally intend to find out.
I'll drink to that.
Yeah. Somewhat relatedly, Michael, Julie said any information or resources on helping with focus and ADHD. I was shocked to discover it could be linked to our gut. I was diagnosed in college, and my daughter, age 6, has the same issues. I don't want to put a label on her or go the medication route, because I know what that was like for me. We both started taking DHA, but I'm not sure if we're taking the right amounts or if there's other steps we should be taking.
Okay. Well, she's touched on some important points. We are now realizing the importance and the magnitude of the influence of our microbiome, those trillions of microbes that live in our intestine. They are not innocent bystanders. They are very active metabolizers of our food. What we eat there, those microbes say, oh boy, lunch is served, and they metabolize some of our food. And very importantly, their byproducts, their waste products, the molecules they produce are not benign. They have names like serotonin and norepinephrine and dopamine. These are neurotransmitters. And they find their way into our circulation. They work their way up our vagus nerve, and they wind up in our brain circulation, and they certainly start exerting neurologic effects. And there's now getting to be strong evidence that the gut microbiome through the neurotransmitters influences our emotions, our food cravings. That chocolate craving that hits you at 2 a.m. might be coming from the gut microbes who you spawn down there through your sugar eating, saying, "Send us more sugar," and it's a way of getting you to satisfy their appetites. This is not idle speculation. When you look at the microbiome of autistic children, the kids who are really on the spectrum and banging their heads against the wall, they have a very different microbiome than normal people do. And clearly those microbes are playing a role. So one question, of course, when I hear these folks, especially the little kids, are just banging off the walls, I ask, what have you been feeding these children? What have they been eating? What have you spawned, or what has that child spawned in their intestinal tract that might be producing these kind of neurotransmitter problems? And it's hard to tease out individual ones, but again, that whole food plant-based diet is meant for we're supposed to eat it through our lifespan, and that kind of diet started in infancy. Will probably produce the kind of microbiome that produces a stable neurochemistry. So whatever it takes to get your child from whatever they're eating to a whole food plant-based diet, with whatever you need to do for a 6-year-old, and put applesauce on the quinoa, whatever you need to do, start changing her food habits so she really likes eating the good foods, and start pulling out the obvious refined sugars if you're doing it, the fruit juices, the candies, the goldfish, whatever you might be eating, and really help this child adopt healthy eating habits, who will also help her to avoid breast cancer and diabetes and all of that. But it might really, really help her ability to concentrate much better. It's going to be gradual. It's not a matter of feeding her quinoa one day and then looking for a 10-point jump in her IQ. But as the weeks go by and the months go by, you should notice an improvement in her mentation and her general behavior. So yes, food is really important when it comes to our mental and emotional state as well.
Yeah. There are some fascinating studies. As I was researching my new book, 31-Day Food Revolution, I was looking at what we're feeding our kids and how it's impacting them. And there are some remarkable studies showing when kids in juvenile detention centers were taken off of processed foods and additives and sugars and chemical flavorings and colorings and preservatives, truancy went way down, compliance went way up. When prisoners have been given healthy food, their rate of recidivism drops. When and it's, I think we've just scratched the surface of what's possible. And I think a lot of the people we see showing signs of distress in their behavior are actually reacting to violations in their nervous system that are coming from the food they're eating. And when you look at what America's children are being fed day in and day out with all of the processed stuff, it's a wonder that we aren't all, going nuts with it. Because, and it's a testament, I think, to the resiliency of the human body that so many people are able to put up with so much abuse and be as sane and competent and capable as they are. But no question that food has a huge impact on mental health and how we feel. And when you eat the right foods, you create the conditions, not for utopia for everybody, but to create the conditions where the body has the optimal chance to do the job it was meant to do, which is to sustain a healthy life and a healthy mind and a healthy emotional balance. Mm-hmm. Brenda, I want to ask you to address, we've gotten a lot of questions about autoimmune disease and Hashimoto's. One of them came from Vanessa, who said, when discussing plant-based eating, there's a lot of research on cancer, diabetes, and heart issues. Yet everything I'm finding on autoimmune, i.e. Hashimoto's, stresses a mostly paleo approach, emphasizing meat, although AIP, I think it's the autoimmune protocol, eliminates dairy and eggs. I felt very good on this no grains AIP approach, but intuitively believe plant-based is healthier. Can you point to research that contradicts AIP or offer studies or resources to support plant-based responses to autoimmune issues?
Oh, wow. I'd love Michael to weigh in on this as well, but no, there aren't a lot of studies. And we've looked at the literature and there are not a lot of studies about diet and Hashimoto's. And what we know is that so people understand autoimmune disease is for some reason the body's attacking its own thyroid. And there are certain nutrients that are necessary for healthy thyroid function from, iodine and selenium and so forth that may be lacking in the diet of some people. And that could be contributing. But also I think that generally if people that have autoimmune disease are often consuming something that their body's sensitive to and they need to get rid of. And for people with Hashimoto's, often they're sensitive to gluten, they're sensitive to dairy. And so these foods are, we need to get rid of. Now, I have known of individuals who have had really good success with whole food plant-based diets, but I've also known many individuals who've had good success with a more paleo style diet. My concern with the paleo style diet, just to get this off my chest, is that 30% of the calories in a paleo diet come from protein. That means people are consuming probably about 150 or more grams of protein a day. Most of that protein is coming from meat, much of it from red meat. That is not good news as far as cancer risk is concerned, as far as heart disease risk is concerned, as far as diabetes risk is concerned. And so to me, a diet that is so high in meat can't possibly be optimal. And so we need more studies, and we need to investigate this a lot more deeply. And I would love for Michael to weigh in, but before he does, I just need to add one thing to your comment about Children Ocean, because I just got back from Seattle, where there's a school there, a preschool, that is going plant-based and completely 100% organic. They're certified, they've got an organic certified kitchen. And I just couldn't believe the parents that are up in arms because ice cream is being taken away. And in place of ice cream, they're doing homemade fruit-based sorbets without any added sugar. They're doing, they're replacing these less healthy foods with super healthy foods. And yet parents are so concerned that their children will be deprived. And so there's a mindset that we need to start, and the food revolution is doing more, I think, than anyone to change the mindset of the nation. But we need to start to understand what good nutrition is. Children are not lacking. Most children are getting excessive amounts of protein and so forth. They're not getting enough vegetables. They're not getting enough fruits. They're not getting enough fiber. That's what's missing. So I think just wanted to throw that in there as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Brenda. Michael, did you want to add anything on autoimmune and thyroid issues in particular, and Hashimoto's?
Right. It's a strange and frustrating disease for the physician. You really want to find out what is causing this. And when you look under the microscope at thyroid tissue, normally it's nice and sedate. But the thyroid under Hashimoto's attack is swarming with lymphocytes. It's like a beehive in there. These lymphocytes, these immune cells have invaded the thyroid tissue and are swarming over it and making antibodies. The question is, what set it off? What broke that barrier that allowed the immune system to attack the thyroid? Still don't know. Gluten might be a role. One thing that makes me a little uneasy, and it's hard to know, but a little gross to talk about it. But when people are chewing on their hot dog or their their beef burger or their hamburger in a fast food place, they grind up tissues from all sorts of animals, and ground up in there, you may have the thyroid from pigs and from calves and from chickens. And people may be eating thyroid tissue from another animal, and it's possible that antibodies are made against that animal thyroid that turns around and attacks your own. It'd be interesting to see the diet of these folks, in the years previous, if that's really what we're looking at here. But it's a strange and frustrating condition. It eventually burns itself out as far as the inflammation goes. How much functioning thyroid tissue you have left after the Hashimoto storm blows through determines if you're going to need to take the thyroid replacement long term. But when we eventually find out what sets this thing off, we'll have a much better set of advice to give folks. But keep up with your iodine and selenium, as Brenda mentioned.
Thanks, Michael. We have a question I'll direct to you as well from Mark, who said, I'm a colon cancer survivor. I changed to a whole food plant-based diet about 15 months ago. So far, so good. Any suggestions to help keep the cancer away?
Yeah, assuming that's for me, absolutely. And realize that these cancers take years to develop, 8 to 10 years classically. Other previous writer who had a rectal cancer, and gee, I've been on a whole food plant-based diet for 2 years, and I developed this cancer. Well, it was percolating in her tissues for 5 to 8 years before that, and if she hadn't adopted the whole food plant-based diet, she might have discovered it after it spread wildly. Fortunately, it seems to have been fairly contained, and hopefully this man is on the right track as far as not initiating another cancer. That's the most important thing. He clearly has the kind of colon capable of sprouting out a colon cancer. If you're smearing carcinogenic cooked burger protein on it or chicken protein on it in your colon day after day from that kind of diet, yes, you could set off another cancer. Well, he's done the most important thing. He's on a whole food plant-based diet. Yay, that's important. Second, he wants to, like the very first question of the day, have that soluble and insoluble fiber. So he creates these big soft stools that move right through the colon so they don't sit there against the colon wall day after day like constipated people can experience it, because that can increase the risk of colon cancer as well. And to minimize high temperature cooking. Even frying a veggie burger still is going to create some carcinogens. The trick to that is as long as water is involved, you'll be okay as far as adding heat to your food. So steam your veggies, make soups and stews. You can add hot water to make rice and oatmeal. As long as water is involved, that temperature is not going to get to a high damaging point, and that'll really minimize the carcinogens. And finally, of course, pay those extra pennies to buy that organic produce so you're not eating those pesticides and herbicides. So by minimizing the carcinogen load with a whole food plant-based diet, soft stools, no high temperature cooking, and by using water as a cooking method, and again, green and yellow, green and yellow, green and yellow, those colored vegetables, and orange. When I say yellow, I'm talking about carrots, squash, sweet potatoes. Keeping your intestine packed with those kind of stabilizing phytonutrients that sweep along the colon wall is a great way to cultivate a colon wall that won't sprout out a cancer.
Thank you. This is going to be one that probably will be a little controversial. Christine asked about coffee. We may even, the three of us, have slightly different takes on this. I wouldn't be surprised. Brenda, I'll ask you to address first. Christine's asking about coffee and whether it is good for fighting cancer or promotes cancer. And she's also asking about acidification because she's heard that coffee is acidifying and hence cancer promoting. And is curious also about alkaline-based diet to heal cancer and other illnesses. So really, these are two different things, with the bridge being the potential acidification of coffee. But let's address them. What's your take on coffee and acidity?
Wow. I've actually never had a cup of coffee in my life. I tasted it when I was 11, and I thought it was the most vile thing that had ever crossed my lips. So that was that for me. But in terms of the research, it's really interesting because we see an association between coffee and decreased risk of diabetes, for example. We see coffee as being protective against with some brain disorders. There are some potentially favorable aspects of coffee, and probably because the bean contains a number of phytonutrients and antioxidants, and the level of antioxidants in the average North American diet is so dismal that it's contributing fairly significantly. On the other hand, the coffee beans are roasted, and they do accumulate a fair bit of acrylamide. And so that is one issue that I think deserves consideration when we're talking about cancer, because with cancer, we don't really want to be putting any gasoline on the fire. And so you're trying to minimize all of those products of oxidation that are formed in food, the heterocyclic amines in meat, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon in anything you blacken, the acrylamide from any, starch containing food that's cooked at a high temperature, the fried foods, the advanced glycation end products, all of these things you're wanting to minimize. So I would prefer to see someone who is at risk for cancer or fighting cancer be drinking something like green tea as opposed to coffee for that reason. As far as the acid goes, yes, coffee is acidic, and for that reason can be somewhat problematic for the bones and for increasing the rate of cancer growth as well. So I'd love to hear what Michael thinks about coffee.
Okay.
Thanks, Brenda. Michael, how about you?
Lovely answer, Brenda. And wow, that's really remarkable. Made it all the way through your life with no coffee. God bless coffee got me through many nights in the emergency room. And if I have to drive all night to see, I'll probably use it to help me keep awake. But those are rare exceptions. What would I say? Before we drill down on coffee itself, I want to talk about drilling down in that this brings us to what Dr. Colin Campbell has been trying to tell us, that as we get more and more granular in our analysis and more reductionistic for this vitamin and that mineral, he's saying, no, it's the whole food stream going through your body and the concert, the symphony of all these nutrients that really make the difference. Is it a healthful food stream or non-healthful food stream? And I think the coffee issue kind of reflects in that. It depends who you are and what you're really eating. If you're someone living on fried chicken and French fries and beer and donuts, probably a cup of black coffee during the day or two really will contribute to jacking up your rate of colon cancer and artery disease, et cetera, et cetera. Especially if you're a 3 or 4 cup a day drinker, as is very common, because people, they're not getting enough sleep and they need the coffee to keep themselves functional during the day. In that kind of setting, the coffee is, I think, unquestionably harmful. If you're someone eating a whole food plant-based diet, everything is just rice and beans and greens and mangoes going through your intestine day after day. And if once a week or twice a week with some friends you want to sip a cup of coffee, is that really causing a great threat? I think probably not. So it depends who you really are, what your whole food stream really is. And as the toxicologists say, the dose makes the poison. 1 cup in the morning is one thing. 5 cups a day to get through this, something else altogether. So I don't. It does have some beneficial properties. And if a cup a day gets you going in the morning, it's hard. I haven't seen any studies saying that it's really a terrible, terrible thing to do. But again, that presupposes the rest of your food stream is really health enhancing, and you're holding it to 1 cup a day. And probably not every day. I think you could sneak it in under the wire in an acceptable diet, but it's not a health food. I'll certainly grant you that.
And Ocean, I just want to add one other thing. Sometimes with coffee, the issue is what you're putting in the coffee.
Yeah.
And, the double, and in Canada, we've got something called the double, which is double cream, double sugar. And then you can go and get these fancy coffees at the Starbucks or wherever, where you're getting 400 or 500 calories in a large, whatever, mocha, whatever you call it. And no, that's a problem. That's a big problem.
Agreed.
Totally, because all those calories are coming from factory farm dairy products and sugar, essentially, right? And along with some chemical flavorings.
Yeah.
And I'll say I'll be the outlier here amongst the 3 of us. I do enjoy black coffee from time to time, not every day. I find that if I drink it regularly, I feel jittery and I actually develop a bit of an addictive quality to it. And it has less and less effect in a positive way and more effect in a negative way. So, but I every so often I enjoy it, and I do cold brew, which is basically you take the ground coffee and you soak it in water overnight, and then you filter it and you never heat it. And that brings down the acidity level by about 50%. And then I'll mix that with a little bit of unsweetened soy milk. And, that's something that I enjoy, not again every day. It kind of makes me jittery if I have too much. but a little bit is pleasant. And my take on the data is that for most people, statistically, it can be beneficial. However, that doesn't mean it's right for you. There are people who can drink it before bed and sleep like a baby. There are people who have a half cup in the morning and they are up all night. Everybody responds, especially to the caffeine, very, very differently. And so listening to your body, this is one of those places where biochemical individuality shows up most potently. So listening to your body, and obviously don't use it as a substitute for sleep or for self-care. A lot of people are so stressed out and they're using coffee as a crutch. And ultimately, it's no substitute for taking good care of your body and nourishing yourself with everything you need. Now, relatedly, green tea and black tea have their own unique antioxidant benefits and nutritional profile. And particularly, green tea has some stunning benefits for human health. Now, some people there too have a problem with the caffeine. If that's true for you, don't drink it or go for some kind of decaffeinated type. But the antioxidants and the polyphenols in green tea are remarkable. And there's a lot of data on this, and it's pretty impressive. So even though I'm not somebody who likes the taste of green tea a whole lot, I've been working to drink a cup a day and develop a taste for it because I'm pretty impressed with how healthy it can be. Now we have a question from Deanne who said, is atrial fibrillation considered heart disease? And if so, can a whole food plant-based diet improve or reverse symptoms? Medicine's not controlling my symptoms and the doctor wants to perform cardiac ablation. And I'll touch on this for a moment, Deanne, and say there are many different kinds of atrial fibrillation and different causes for it. The most common cause is going to be the standard American diet, where it is one of the things that a distressed heart can do to show that it's you've got some kind of heart disease going on. But there's also a mechanical issue sometimes at play, which could happen to anybody. And if you have a mechanical defect, then the ablations, there's been a big breakthrough in the cardiac ablation procedures in the last 15 years, 20 years. The Cleveland Clinic kind of pioneered it. Dr. Natali led the way with a new way of doing ablations that's far more effective than what they used to have. And for some people, that can be a lifesaver. We heard from Andrew. I'll ask Michael to address this. He said, how can LDL cholesterol of someone who is 100% low-fat, whole foods, plant-based, zero animals, go from 70 to 103 over a 3-month time period? I'm presuming Andrew may have had this experience. Michael, any theories on what might be going on here?
Absolutely. And I'm in the process of creating a little video for my website called Beyond Cholesterol and trying to how to free yourself from the cholesterol panic here. We're so driven by these numbers. Oh, your LDL is going from this to that. And that means you have an increased risk of heart attack, etc. Realize that all those studies, every single one of them, are done on cheeseburger, pepperoni, pizza eating people. And if you are a cheeseburger pizza eater, and that's shorthand for eating the standard Western diet, if you're eating that diet, yes, so LDL of 173 is not healthy for you. But a high LDL is not it does not equal. Let me back up one more. Cholesterol is not an evil molecule. Your liver makes it for a reason. Your adrenal glands use it to make cortisol. Your gonads use it to make testosterone. And it's a normal molecule that the body makes. And on a given day, if your liver decided to keep 170 milligrams of cholesterol in your bloodstream, that is not the same thing as the disease of atherosclerosis. The disease of atherosclerosis is an active biological inflammatory process. It's an inflammatory fire burning in your arteries, set off by starting with the injury to the inner endothelial lining, meal after meal of barbecue chicken and hot coffee and beer and high fructose corn syrup and phosphoric acid and cola drinks and this assault of injuring molecules is what rips up the endothelial lining of the inside of the arteries that then lets oxidize cholesterol. The very act of cooking meat oxidizes the cholesterol in the meat. And so now you've got these oxidized cholesterol particles in your blood after eating the burger or the chicken that now see this ripped up endothelial lining that lets them penetrate deeper into the artery wall to set off the process of creating these atherosclerotic plaques that can lead to clots and strokes, etc. Well, if you're eating rice and beans and greens, you're not doing that to your arteries, assuming you're not smoking and not drinking Cokes and all those things. If every meal is healing your endothelial linings, as Dr. Esselstyn shows us, can be the case. And if you're just putting these soothing, cooling, stabilizing phytonutrients, big salads and big plates of steamed green and yellow vegetables, there's no reason that inflammatory fire of atherosclerosis should be burning in your artery walls. And if that's the case, if your diet is healing your arteries on a daily basis, I don't particularly care that on a given day when that needle was in your vein, your total cholesterol was 190 or 210. I've got lots of vegans with cholesterols at 210. It's just what their liver needs to keep in their blood so their adrenals can get on with their steroid synthesis. It's not the disease of atherosclerosis. So for the clinicians out there, hypercholesterolemia does not equal atherosclerosis. In plant-eating folks. Now, in Joe Six-Pack American, who is eating the burgers and the pizzas, yes, his elevated cholesterol is a problem because it's a marker of what else he's doing to his arteries. It's not the number itself. It's a marker this guy is ripping up his artery walls and is setting himself up for atherosclerotic plaque. So to the vegans who really, really are eating a healthy, whole food underlying plant-based diet, who's not living on granola bars and energy drinks and vegan junk food, if you're really eating that oatmeal and fruit and soups and salads and greens and all that, and meal after meal, you're flowing through your arteries with molecules that stabilize the artery walls. I don't particularly care if your LDL is 170 or 150 or whatever. It's not going to lead to atherosclerotic plaque formation as far as we can see at this point. So focus on the good foods, disengage from the tyranny of the numbers there for a couple of years. And then if you're really interested, check your inflammatory markers. See if your arteries inflamed. There are blood tests your doctors can order, high sensitivity CRP, myeloperoxidase, MPO, phospholipase enzyme. These are elevated when that plaque is really developing in your arteries. Focus on those rather than how is your LDL. That doesn't tell you what's really happening in those artery walls. So eat a healthy, whole food, plant-based diet. Check your inflammatory markers if you're concerned. And there are specialty labs like Cleveland Heart Lab, Boston Heart, who can, though most of them are now measuring these inflammatory markers. Focus on them, not just your LDL. Free yourself from the tyranny of those LDL numbers. Eat a whole food, plant-based diet, and get on with your life.
Thanks, Michael. And I know I said it at the beginning, but I will say it again now that none of this is medical advice. This is coaching and education. As in all things, you are ultimately responsible for your own health journey in consultation with your health professionals who know your journey far better than we possibly could. So with that as context, take it all with a grain of sodium-free salt. And, Brenda, I'd love to ask if you could address this next one from Melanie. She said, I can't begin to tell you the gratitude I feel for what you all are doing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I started going whole food plant-based in 2017. In 2 weeks, my LDL cholesterol came down 38 points. My overall cholesterol was sub 200 for the first time in my life. I'm 61 and I feel the best I've ever felt. I'm over a year and a half into whole food plant-based diet. One thing I've noticed is my nails have gotten thinner and more brittle. I'd like to know if you have any suggestions.
Well, Michael talked about nails to some degree as well, but yeah. I think in my experience, the nutrients that are most commonly lacking when nails get thin and brittle when you're eating a whole food plant-based diet are protein, iron, zinc, magnesium, some of the B vitamins, biotin, B12, and essential fatty acids. And so when you look at that package, what are people lacking? Well, they're lacking legumes, nuts, and seeds, and especially seeds, which are the, more concentrated in the essential fatty acids and of course the trace minerals and protein as well. And so I would say to to anyone that's having this issue, look at what are you including in each meal. And so for breakfast, for example, if you're doing a breakfast bowl, if you're doing a smoothie, whatever you're doing, what source of protein, iron, and zinc? And iron is a fairly big issue for nails. And so that's something, it's always nice to get your levels tested to know where you're at, but you want to make sure. So one of the things that I do is I often, in the whole grain I cook, I throw in some lentils. So in my breakfast bowl, it's a mix of whole grains and lentils to add in more of those trace minerals and a little bit extra protein. And so you can do that. Think about that for each meal. But those are the nutrients that are most consistently associated with nails getting thin.
Boy, leave it to the dietitian. Well answered, Brenda. I picked up some good ones probably on that one. Thank you very much. That was an excellent answer. Well done. Thank you.
This is just a phenomenal wealth of information here today. I'm just so happy to be here with all of you joining us. And Michael and Brenda, what a resource. If you're feeling overwhelmed by all the information, I do want to say that we will be offering a transcript of this event for all of the Empowerment Package owners, as well as Whole Life Club members. So you'll have the ability to listen to the recording over time, and also to have the transcript to absorb it, because there's certainly a lot of information here. And even I've heard a few new terms today, which is wonderful. Brenda, we had a question from Heidi who asked about hot flashes. Do you have any ideas for how to address them?
Well, it's interesting. I'm a postmenopausal 60-year-old female. And so I've gone through all of that, but I had almost no hot flashes at all. And I don't know if it's just my genetics. I'm not sure, but I can tell you what I do. And that is, or what I did back then even. I certainly eat a whole food plant-based diet. I do include plenty of dark green leafy vegetables, but I also do include soy. And I only use organic soy. I try to use less processed soy. So I'm using things like tofu and tempeh and edamame. But those foods do provide some what we call phytoestrogens. And for people that aren't so familiar with phytoestrogens, the phytoestrogens are plant estrogens, and so they're not human estrogens. They're much weaker. They actually can act. They're called selective estrogen receptor modulators, and in some tissues they act as weak estrogen. In other tissues they act as a anti-estrogen, actually. And so in bones, for example, they act more like a weak estrogen. In breast tissue, they seem to act more like an anti-estrogen because they attach to estrogen receptor sites, not allowing the more potent human estrogen to get on, which has been shown over time to actually be protective against breast cancer and to reduce risk of recurrence and so forth of breast cancer. But in terms of hot flashes, having a little bit of estrogen in your system acting as a weak estrogen may actually be protective. They say in Japan, where people use soya as a sort of a dietary staple, they don't even have a word for hot flashes because it's really non-existent there, as far as I know. And so I think that's one thing you can do. But again, the whole food, a lot of vegetables, a lot of leafy greens, lots of fiber, phytochemicals, and so forth. I think those things are very, very helpful. We have to remember you also can get more potent estrogens in animal products. So that, that can be problematic for some people as well. Yeah, I think those are the main things, the soy and the whole plant foods.
Thank you, Brenda. Michael, we had a question from Janelle that I think you're the perfect person to answer. She said, really enjoyed the summit. I'm looking forward to implementing many of the suggestions. What are your thoughts on intermittent fasting? I'm curious if it really does decrease the amount of insulin floating around in our blood and improve our chances of decreasing body fat.
Indeed, this is another video I'm going to be posting on my website. This is such an important topic, and we could spend all day talking about fasting. And it's a fearsome idea to some people who panic over missing lunch, let alone to go for a day or two or more without food. But when you look back 1 million years ago, our ancient foraging ancestors on the African savanna frequently, I'm sure, went 4 or 5 days before they found that next berry bush with fruit on it. And intermittent short fasts are probably the rule for our bodies, and our bodies know how to adjust to this. And when we go for 48 hours without taking in sugars, carbohydrates, the body shifts into a gear to start burning fats called ketosis. And some remarkable things happen, especially during the early days of ketosis. The body goes into a state of conservation. It turns off inflammation. It turns down cancer growth. It doesn't want to waste calories on reactions that it doesn't think is going to be helpful. If no more calories are coming in, your body doesn't know if it's ever going to eat again. So it shuts down some of these harmful or less beneficial reactions. And it also does a couple other things as far as promoting tissue repair. And because the body stem cells in our bone marrow and our tissues, when after a few days in ketosis, they kind of hunker down and they go into a state of not suspended animation, but they stop putting out their usual proteins. They kind of wait till the storm blows by, till all these ketones clears out. Why is that beneficial? Well, cancer cells, if you have anybody, they can't do that. They can't get into that preservation gear. And so when people do chemotherapy or some other treatment during a fasting state, they get a much better response from that. And I've been telling my ladies with breast cancer or guys with prostate cancer, don't say anything to the oncologist. But if you're scheduled for a chemotherapy treatment, go in on day 3 of a water fast. You're going to get a much better response. You have a lot less nausea and side effects afterwards. But in general, a couple of things. So is intermittent fasting, we're talking at the most 2 to 5 days, no more than 5 days at home on your own, once a month. We're talking about this is classic intermittent fasting. Even 1 day off eating is nice, but you don't go into ketosis till about the end of day 2. But a couple of days of ketosis every month seems to do wonderful things for the body as far as inflammation, lowering cancer risk, and improving longevity. But again, we're Americans. If a little is good, more must be better. You stayed in ketosis 3 days, I'm going to stay in ketosis 6 months. That'll help. And that's where you get into these ketogenic diets. This is not helpful. Ketosis is an emergency state. It's okay to stay in it for a week or so, but you don't want to grind on ketosis month after month. It's like driving your car to Seattle in passing gear. You're going to burn out the engine. So we're talking about just a couple of days once a month, or its cousin is called time-restricted feeding, where you just rearrange your eating day. So you get up in the morning and instead of shoving a bunch of oatmeal and fruit in your mouth, just drink water till noon. You get an extra 5 hours of that nighttime fasting state every day. And then do your eating between noon and 6 in the evening. And after 6 in the evening, be done with eating, get back into that fasting state. So you spend 18 hours in the fasting state, 6 hours eating. That's called time-restricted feeding. Some people blur it with intermittent fasting, but that's a lovely thing to do as well. Lots of benefits for that. So I invite people to learn about it, research it, and to try it for yourself. Assuming you're not on a bunch of medications, it's a safe thing to do. Any question, though, check with your doctor or call someplace like True North Health Center in Santa Rosa and get their advice. Maybe you can go up there to get started learning how to fast. But fasting is a good thing. We eat too much too often. Check it out. Not eating is a blessing. It's a good thing for your body and your spirit.
Thank you, Michael. I think it's worth mentioning because there is such a fad and so much attention right now on ketogenic diets and ketosis. I just want to make sure it's really clear. Michael's talking about fasting-induced ketosis, not about a diet based around meat and animal products that's devoid of fiber and phytonutrients that come from plants, which a lot of the ketogenic diets are. They're basically lots and lots of fat and little to no carbs. And carbohydrates are an important part of a healthy diet. Taking a couple days off from eating is really different than basing your diet around animal products. And there is no data behind that shows long-term health benefit from it. So unless, to be clear, certain forms of epilepsy, a ketogenic diet long-term may be beneficial. But other than that, there's no data backing up a ketogenic diet for long-term health, increasing life expectancy or overall wellness. It can facilitate short-term weight loss. So can chemotherapy. So can a lot of other things. but that doesn't mean that it's optimal for your health. But again, we're talking about intermittent fasting here, which is maybe part of a way to capture the benefits of ketosis in a way that isn't bad for your long-term health. It's actually good for it. We're nearing the end of our time here. I can't believe how fast it's gone, and we have hundreds of questions we haven't gotten to, but I want to thank you for your curiosity and your attention and your interest, everybody joining us right now. And whatever we haven't gotten to, keep your fire going and growing and learning. And there's a pretty good chance that in the Food Revolution Summit, you will find answers to a lot of the questions that have been shared here, because this is such a wealth of information. So I want to thank you for being with us. And I want to again say we have a convergence here of several different communities right now. We have Whole Life Club members. Every month we have an action hour where we interview a leading health revolutionary, or in this case, two, and we share their top insights, and we invite you to ask questions and bring them into that event. And it's an incredible experience. I love getting to do this every single month. I'm learning so much. And this is also for the Food Revolution Summit community and all the people who have been in the summit. And we've been answering as many questions as we could from empowerment package owners. And you can join both of those groups. If you are not already a Whole Life Club member, go to foodrevolutionsummit.org/whole to join it today. And if you don't already have an empowerment package for the Food Revolution Summit, you can grab a copy right on the broadcast page for a special discount that's still available till end of day tomorrow. And you can own the entire summit, including this event, all the transcripts, all the recordings, plus a huge collection of bonuses for life. And now, as we're wrapping up here, let me ask Brenda, I feel so grateful for your time, your brilliance, your wisdom, your books. Any last things you would share with us today?
Well, I just have to chime in on the whole keto.
Okay.
This is something near and dear to my heart. And I think what people really need to understand is, in order to achieve health and longevity long term, we need to maximize the protective components in the diet, the phytochemicals, the antioxidants, the plant sterols and stanols, the fiber, all of those things. And we need to minimize the components we know are associated with increased disease risk. A long-term ketogenic diet does the exact opposite. And all whole plant foods are mostly carbohydrate. They're 60 to 90% carbohydrate and then some, and with the exception of nuts and seeds. And so it's impossible to construct a diet that's 5% carbohydrates and 80% fat and think it's going to actually support long-term health. It just doesn't make sense. And so I just want people to really think about what they're doing and what they're choosing, because this is your life long term, and not just yours, but those of all of, the lives of all the people you influence by what you do, your peers, your family, and so on and so forth. So it has been an absolute privilege and pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much, Ocean and Michael.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brenda. And Michael, any closing words you'd share with us?
Gratitude and appreciation to my colleagues in dietetics and masterful communication here. Again, your body is never not looking. You don't have to answer to Ocean or to Brenda or to me. You got to answer to your arteries and your heart and your colon and that wonderful body you're walking around in. We are plant-eating organisms. To thy own nature be true. You can't put diesel fuel in a gasoline-burning engine and think it's going to work well. It won't. Eat the food we're supposed to. Enjoy it. It should be a joyous thing, not an anxiety-producing event. Eat your food with joy and gratitude, and your body will respond, and your life will get better, so you can get on with what we're really supposed to do here, and that's to learn and to laugh and to love as much as you can.
Beautiful. I love that ending, Michael.
Right.
That it's all, let's learn and laugh and love as much as we can. I think health even is a means to a greater end, which is to do what we were born for. And it's to love our lives and to love the people we cherish and to be a contribution to the world around us. So blessings to you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for caring. Thank you for participating in this food revolution with us. We are so grateful you're here, and we look forward to a lot more adventures and sharing and learning and growing and healing together in the years to come. This is Ocean Robbins and Brenda Davis and Michael Clapper, thanking you so much for joining us today and wishing you health, vitality, lots of good food. Hoping you enjoy the rest of Encore weekend with all of the summit interviews available on replay. And if you're an empowerment package owner, that you're able to absorb it all and enjoy it all for life. And we wish you an absolutely beautiful day. And thank you again so much for being with us today.
Bye.